With the King reportedly ruling out any suggestion of a part-time role for the Duke of Sussex. Our Europe correspondent Ben Downey reports.
In a stunning twist that has sent shockwaves through the royal world, Meghan Markle is now pleading directly with King Charles after a final, heartbreaking decision from the palace. It's over. For months, tension simmered behind closed doors, but insiders say the King's latest ruling has drawn a bold, unmovable line, one that Meghan never saw coming. So, what unfolded behind the royal walls? Why has the King taken such an uncompromising stance? Join us as we unravel Meghan's desperate move to appease King Charles. King Charles's final decision on Meghan, the decision Meghan Markle never truly believed would come, has finally arrived, quietly, privately, and with a level of finality so absolute that those who witnessed it said there was no space left for debate, persuasion, or charm. Senior palace insiders revealed that King Charles has now delivered what they are calling his final decision about Meghan. A decision that doesn't just close a door, it ends an entire chapter, one that many inside the monarchy never thought he would dare to close.
And I think a lot of that gets lost in what can be super dehumanizing when you look at the clickbait culture. And
the words that slipped from those high-ceilinged palace rooms weren't loud or emotional. There were no raised voices, no dramatic pauses. Instead, they were calm, deliberate, and spoken in the firm, quiet tone Charles uses only when his mind is completely made up. It's over. In the days leading up to this, pressure had been building on Charles to act, slowly at first, then louder over the weekend. Because by allowing Meghan not a marriage, not a title, but a chapter, a long, chaotic, unpredictable chapter that began the moment she entered royal life, the King had given her more space and patience than many believed she deserved. And now, that chapter has finally been closed. When the King's final decision reached Montecito, the reaction was immediate. Sources say Meghan froze. Her team went into full panic mode, and Harry was completely blindsided. For the first time in a very long while, the palace acted with absolute clarity. No hesitation, no loopholes, no fear of the public backlash that was sure to follow. For years, Meghan continued using her HRH styling despite being instructed not to by the late Queen Elizabeth II, and insiders say this had deeply frustrated Prince William. But this time, Charles wasn't trying to smooth things over. He wasn't trying to compromise. He wasn't trying to keep the peace, something he had spent decades doing. This time, Charles made a final, irreversible choice.
So you can't be the same as the sovereign if you're the Prince of Wales or the heir.
One that completely closes the door. And it all begins with what the palace is calling a necessary final boundary. A boundary Meghan never imagined Charles would enforce. A boundary that changes everything. Many forget. William once said that if Harry wanted to appear at the coronation, it would be extraordinary, a sign of just how far the family had fallen apart. I don't think there is a way back, one longtime royal watcher said. But what forced Charles to finally act? To understand that, you have to look at what has been developing quietly behind palace walls for months. This wasn't triggered by a single headline or a single documentary. It wasn't one interview or one public comment. It wasn't one speech or one podcast moment. It was a pattern, slow, steady, and impossible to ignore. Senior advisors had been watching a rising escalation long before the public noticed anything. Palace insiders say Charles had grown deeply concerned about how Meghan has been presenting herself in recent appearances, brand teasers, and public messaging. There were subtle mentions of royal life, carefully chosen wording that suggested she still held an active royal connection, and high-profile projects that blurred the line between her personal brand and the royal legacy. In short, Meghan was strategically positioning herself as if she were still inside the institution, even though she had stepped away.
certainly after the pandemic and everything else, we crave that. We crave being able to go high and
And now, The consequences have arrived. Behind the scenes, William is reportedly preparing a major campaign that may result in multiple minor royals being stripped of their titles, a sign that the monarchy is tightening its structure and preparing for a stricter, more streamlined future. At first, the king chose to stay calm. He didn't rush, didn't react, and didn't let emotion lead him. Instead, he watched, he listened, he waited, he hoped, quietly, that everything would settle down on its own. But then came what palace insiders now call the final wave of warning signs, the moment when everyone realized the situation was no longer harmless. It started with a new brand launch, then a perfectly rehearsed public speech, followed by a string of high-profile meetings and an unexpected international campaign that shocked senior officials once they understood what it truly suggested. One issue, however, hit the king on a deeply personal level: Catherine. It became painfully clear that Meghan was still pulling from the monarchy's power, its symbols, its history, its prestige, long after stepping away from royal duties. Behind closed doors, advisors began warning King Charles that this was becoming a serious threat to the family's image.
To bring down inflation, to ease the cost of living for families.
Something that could easily spin out of control if they didn't act quickly. One advisor didn't sugarcoat it, saying, "Your Majesty, this will not stop on its own." That was the moment everything changed. For the first time, every top advisor, from communications teams to legal experts to senior protocol officers, agreed completely. The monarchy needed to act quickly and decisively. Not next month, not after the next PR stunt, not after the next controversy. Now, because if they didn't set a firm boundary today, they feared Meghan would rewrite the entire royal story by tomorrow. And so, behind locked doors and away from the public, King Charles made a decision. Insiders say it was a choice years in the making, and one that led directly to the moment Meghan heard the words she never believed would come from the palace again. It's over. Charles's private meetings with senior advisors, once the warnings reached him, King Charles quietly shifted the palace into a controlled, almost silent lockdown. Nothing dramatic, nothing messy, just a calm but unmistakably serious response.
Demonstrates clearly that whilst we may not all have a shared history,
sources say the king began a series of intense, high-level meetings lasting several days, was heavier, more urgent, and more thorough than the last. These weren't friendly check-ins. These were crisis meetings with the most powerful people inside the institution: the Privy Council, senior communications leaders, legal strategists, protocol experts, and advisors who only appear when the monarchy faces a long-term threat. One source said Charles entered the room with a calm but unshakable firmness, the kind of firmness that tells you he already knows the answer before anyone even speaks. Documents were spread across tables, timelines were studied. Meghan's public appearances, brand strategies, interviews, and subtle references to royal life were analyzed frame by frame and line by line.
Because it feels really inclusive and there's representation and it's just like a sweet love story.
One advisor warned, "Sir, if you don't act now, you will lose control of the royal narrative." Another pointed out that Meghan's rising influence in the U.S. could create global confusion. Two versions of the monarchy, one official, one unofficial. Charles listened carefully, not with anger, not with impatience, but with a steady determination that even his closest advisors didn't expect. By the end of the final meeting, the energy in the room shifted. The palace would no longer wait for the next documentary, the next leak, the next polished media appearance. They would act, not with a press release, not with a quiet reminder, but with a decision so clear, so final, that it could not be undone. Those who were present say the king ended the meeting with one quiet sentence that felt like the closing of a chapter. This chapter must end. And within hours, the machinery of the monarchy moved. Papers were drafted, notifications prepared, a discreet courier assigned. How did Meghan respond to the king's decision? Let's find out. The moment Meghan realized it was over. When King Charles's final decision reached Montecito, it didn't come with any royal ceremony, no formal letter in a velvet envelope, no announcement to the press, no polite warning. It came quietly, privately, delivered in a way that made it unmistakable. This message was for Meghan alone. According to those close to the moment, Meghan was completely caught off guard. Not angry at first, not upset, just stunned. She read the message once, then again, slowly, and then it hit her. Advisors inside the house say Meghan's voice quickly shifted from confusion to disbelief.
I think you feel really confident that it was divinely ordered. Maybe all of this, our friendship, you becoming our...
And then to full panic. She demanded answers. She asked who approved the decision. She wanted to know whether Harry had been informed. She argued that there had to be a misunderstanding, but there wasn't, because unlike past palace decisions, the subtle distancing, the quiet corrections, the behind-the-scenes adjustments, this one was final. No negotiation, no appeal, no gentle wording to soften the blow. It was the end, and it arrived exactly the way the king intended. One insider described her reaction in a way that left everyone stunned. Meghan never saw this coming, not at this moment, not in this way. She always believed the palace would leave a small window open for her someday, a chance to return, a chance to rewrite the story, a chance to rebuild what was broken. But this decision did the exact opposite. It slammed that window shut for good.
40 friends to donate 40 minutes of their time to help mentor a woman who's mobilizing back into the workforce.
According to people who were there, Meghan began pacing around the room, her steps restless and uneven. Her voice shook as she tried to understand what had just happened. She wanted to know who had influenced the king, who had pushed for such a firm decision, and why it was happening now. And when it finally hit her that this wasn't a suggestion or a warning, but a final declaration, everything about her changed. There were tears, rising frustration, and a deep sense of betrayal. She felt a real fear that this moment was a turning point, a point she could not undo. For the first time since she stepped away from royal life, Meghan wasn't just being ignored or sidelined. She was being cut off completely, and everything that followed, every phone call she made, every rushed message, every attempt to control the story, it all showed how shaken she truly was. The palace had finally drawn a line, and Meghan, for the first time, found herself unmistakably on the outside of it. But what was Harry's response? Was he also heartbroken? Let's take a closer look. Harry's unexpected reaction. But Meghan wasn't the only one feeling the weight of this decision. If anyone felt it as strongly, it was Prince Harry. Insiders say he was told before Meghan, not because he was being favored, and not because she was being dismissed, but because King Charles believed Harry deserved to hear it directly, rather than through a leak or a headline. But that moment of courtesy became the start of something much bigger and much more painful. Those close to the situation say Harry's reaction was a blend of shock, frustration, and something deeper, a heavy, emotional realization that no matter what he did, he could never fully protect the two worlds.
There's the spare and the heir, my brother being the heir and me being the spare, and so...
He had been trying to keep together since 2018. When the king explained the decision, Harry pushed back. Not loudly, not angrily, but with emotion. He asked for time. He asked his father to reconsider. He wondered if the decision could be softened, delayed, or made to sound less harsh. But King Charles did not budge. A senior aide described the king's tone as calm, steady, respectful, but absolutely unshakable. And that, insiders say, was the moment Harry finally saw something he had tried to avoid for years. His father wasn't just drawing a line between the palace and the public. He was drawing a line between the institution and Meghan. When Harry finally told Meghan the news, everything in Montecito shifted instantly. There were tears, not just from Meghan, but from Harry too, because he knew that whatever happened next, he would once again be pushed into the role he hated more than anything.
Sort of dives in and out of the seriousness. You are a humorous man.
I'm a humorous person, yeah.
The bridge between two worlds that no longer wanted to meet. One source put it simply: Harry wasn't just upset with King Charles. He was devastated that he couldn't fix this. Not this time. The tension between father and son has never been simple, but this moment created a new kind of distance. Quiet, painful, and so deep that neither side knows how to repair it. And behind closed doors, in those private moments he never talks about, Harry wondered the same thing everyone inside the palace was whispering. If the king has really made his last and final call, then what exactly does that leave for Meghan's future? Let's find out. What does the future hold for Meghan? The moment that everyone had been speculating about, whispering over, and trying to predict for years has finally arrived. For the first time since Meghan stepped away from royal life, King Charles has issued a formal, written, institution-level directive so absolute that it leaves no room for argument, negotiation, or reversal. According to palace insiders, this final decision contains 3 major points, each more decisive than anything that had come before. First, Meghan will no longer be allowed to reference, hint at, or attach herself to the monarchy in any upcoming projects, brands, or media ventures without explicit written permission from the palace. In other words, the era of gray zone royal branding, where she could suggest a connection without clear approval, is officially over. Second, any remaining royal privileges or courtesies, those small, informal allowances the family rarely mentions, have now been fully revoked. Travel perks, symbolic associations, quiet access to certain circles, all have quietly disappeared. One insider described it as a reset of boundaries that should have been established years ago. From this moment on, Meghan will no longer have the palace stepping in to shield her from international controversies. When disputes arise, there will be no softening statements, no behind-the-scenes corrections, no diplomatic cushioning. For the first time, she will stand entirely on her own without the silent support the palace once provided. One advisor put it bluntly: this isn't punishment.
As you'll likely hear many times this week, look, as we just heard, you'll hear all sorts of things.
It's protection for the institution. Inside the palace, however, whispers carried a sharper tone. Those who saw the paperwork when it was finalized said it wasn't just about setting limits, it was about sealing them. This wasn't temporary, symbolic, or for appearances. It was final. For Meghan, this changes everything. For everyone. Around the king, the message was unmistakable. This chapter is over. The written document itself, though strict, tells only half the story. The other half is delivered in silence, the kind of silence that the monarchy has perfected over centuries. That silence is what unsettled Meghan the most. According to insiders, King Charles didn't attach a long explanation, a soft preface, or any gesture of reconciliation. He simply allowed the document to speak for itself. And within the palace walls, everyone understood the meaning. The monarchy is no longer playing defense. For years, senior royals had tried to maintain calm, absorbing criticism, avoiding confrontation, and hoping situations would settle naturally. But this decision marks a turning point. A senior courtier summarized it plainly. Silence no longer means protection. Silence now means boundary. That boundary could not be clearer. By revoking privileges, controlling the use of royal identity, and refusing to intervene on Meghan's behalf in future controversies, the palace sent a message that needed no signatures or explanation. The monarchy will no longer be a springboard for personal branding. This is not about anger or revenge. It is structural. One insider explained that the king's target was not Meghan personally, but the pattern she represented and any similar patterns in the future. What Meghan may have once assumed was a temporary pause or a public relations chill is now permanent. This is not a family argument. It is about precedent, legacy, and control of the royal narrative. In that narrative, Meghan has officially moved from being a royal figure to a private individual with all the boundaries that status demands. The palace doesn't need to say it aloud. The document already does. This chapter has ended.
It happened a few weeks ago, earlier this month, here at our cottage.
And a new one begins without her influence. From the outside, this may look like another dramatic headline, another private clash, or a continuation of the royal feud. But the implications run far deeper. Senior royal analysts say King Charles's decision is about the next decade, the next generation, and the long-term stability of the monarchy itself. For years, the palace assumed that younger royals, Harry, Meghan, and their children, could exist at the edges of the institution without disturbing its foundation. That assumption has slowly unraveled. The rise of influencer culture, the merging of celebrity and royalty, the monetization of personal narratives, and the global media attention built around emotional storytelling have all created pressures the monarchy was never designed to handle. Meghan, with her Hollywood background, her massive global following, and her ability to dominate headlines, became the clearest example of how quickly these lines could blur. One advisor put it simply, if we don't set boundaries now, there won't be any boundaries left later. What could be Meghan's next step? Let's find out. Meghan's next move. For months, people believed King Charles was too gentle, too cautious, too willing to leave doors open. But this moment proved something very different. When the crown's reputation and integrity are at stake, Charles acts decisively, even if it means ending a relationship that once captured the world's attention. Supporters of Meghan see his move as harsh. Critics see it as long overdue. The palace sees it as necessary. This was never about punishing Meghan. It was about protecting the monarchy from a future where its image, its identity, and its meaning could be shaped by outsiders rather than by those within the institution. Insiders were stunned, not because the decision was dramatic, but because it was final, permanent, and strategic. It wasn't made for today. It was made to protect the monarchy for decades to come. Everyone inside the palace knows one thing. Meghan Markle does not stay silent under pressure. The moment she realized King Charles's decision was absolute, final, non-negotiable, irreversible, her entire team sprang into action.
I want to tell you a story that'll sort of give context to my being here and my work with UN Women.
Sources say Meghan immediately held an emergency call with her US-based advisors. Not days later, hours. PR specialists, brand managers, legal consultants, and media contacts all rushed to assess the situation. Meghan understands the public better than almost anyone. In her world, silence equals defeat. The first priority was damage control. Advisors considered a carefully worded statement framing the palace's decision as harsh or outdated. But that carried risk. Another idea surfaced, a major interview, a new documentary, or a high-profile speech subtly addressing institutional challenges without naming the monarchy. Then came the most concerning idea, insiders say, something that could escalate tensions, using upcoming brand projects to reclaim the narrative, a tactic Meghan has used before under pressure. One source described the mood bluntly. They weren't planning a calm response. They were planning a counterattack. The challenge is this. Charles's restrictions mean Meghan cannot reference the royal family without risking backlash. She is now forced to rebuild her public strategy entirely, without leaning on the monarchy. Some advisors urged caution, others urged retaliation, but everyone agreed on one thing. If Meghan feels cornered, she will not remain quiet. For her, this is more than a royal setback. It is a fight over narrative, the arena where she exerts her greatest power. What she does next could either contain this crisis or turn it into a much larger fire. The moment that will be remembered most was not a confrontation, a meeting, or a public announcement. It was a sentence, quietly delivered behind closed doors, after the final paperwork had been signed, sealed, and entered into the official record.
Mr. and Mrs. Bridges, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Tenekatoa katoa.
Insiders say someone left that room, took a breath, and said two words, now echoing across royal commentary. It's over. It was not dramatic. It was not emotional. It was simply final. King Charles's decision was not a temporary boundary or a symbolic gesture. It was a permanent, structural choice that closed a chapter Meghan once believed she could revisit. The palace is not waiting for reconciliation. There will be no return, no second chances, no collaboration. This was a line in the sand. For Meghan, it means navigating the future without royal protection or association. For Harry, it deepens the divide between the family he was born into and the one he built, a gap that apologies or calls cannot bridge. For King Charles, it marks a shift from patience to preservation, showing that protecting the monarchy outweighs personal ties. And for the institution itself, it signals a historic moment. But how is the international world reacting to this decision? Let's find out. The international backlash. The news of King Charles's final decision was never meant to escape the palace walls. It was intended to remain a closely guarded secret, confined to Buckingham Palace and the gates of Montecito. But decisions this monumental, this absolute, and this historic almost never stay hidden for long. Within days, whispers grew louder, murmurs spread, and soon leaks began to surface. Curious reporters appeared where they hadn't before, asking pointed, unusual questions. Royal watchers noticed subtle changes in official language. International media smelled the story like sharks sensing blood in the water. Final decision began creeping into headlines. At first, it appeared in speculative, cautious reports. Then, articles grew bolder, citing high-level palace insiders. What was supposed to be a private matter suddenly became global news. Analysts debated it on morning shows. Royal commentators declared it the end of an era. Editors scrambled to get insider quotes explaining the king's reasoning. Some headlines leaned sympathetic toward Meghan, others were ruthless. Almost all agreed on one undeniable fact: the relationship between Meghan Markle and the monarchy had reached a breaking point, a point that could never be repaired. Inside Montecito, the atmosphere shifted rapidly. Panic gave way to damage control, which soon hardened into defensive strategy. Meghan's team began tracking every article, monitoring online trends, and preparing for the inevitable global wave. Experts warned that this attention would have consequences far beyond headlines, affecting her image, her brands, her partnerships, future projects, and her ability to control her story without royal interference.
And then I said, okay, I've always loved being able to share. I've always loved.
Once the world believes a door is closed, every move she makes is scrutinized through that lens. One insider described it as a reputational earthquake, the kind that can reshape public perception for years. And in the palace, silence. The kind of silence that speaks louder than any statement. The message was clear. The monarchy would move forward without her. But Meghan wasn't about to stay quiet. Behind the gates of Montecito, a counter-strategy was already forming. Insiders say it's bold, calculated, and potentially explosive. The fallout had only just begun, and her next move could ignite a storm. While the palace remained frozen in silent control, Montecito swung into action. Meghan Markle understands one thing with perfect clarity. When the narrative turns against you, hesitation is dangerous. You pivot, and you pivot fast. Insiders reveal she immediately began assembling a detailed plan, not just for public response, but for long-term survival and influence. This was no longer panic. This was strategy in motion. Her team divided the crisis into manageable segments: public image, brand positioning, media openings, legal boundaries, and emotional leverage. A war room was set up with screens showing trending analytics, social sentiment charts, news cycles, and influencer reactions. They mapped out 3 possible paths. Option 1, a quiet reset, appearing in public with calm composure, no defensiveness, no confrontation, letting subtle grace sway sympathy toward her. Option 2, narrative reclamation, a controlled media appearance, a feature, or a documentary segment highlighting systemic obstacles she faced, framing the king's decision as a symbol of the institution she left behind. Option 3, the direct counterattack, a bold, pointed statement hinting at injustice, subtly questioning the monarchy's authority, taking the fight head-on. Insiders say this is the path her team quietly favors. Controversy generates attention. Attention generates influence. Yet Meghan's greatest challenge isn't just the palace. It's the rules Charles has now imposed. She can no longer hint at royal connections, symbolism, or identity without facing backlash, or even legal consequences. This restriction strikes at the heart of her brand, which was built in part on royal proximity. A strategist close to her put it bluntly: she must now grow her platform without the very element that fueled her rise. Behind the scenes, Meghan is carefully planning her next move. Every step must respond to the king's boundaries without crossing them, because from this moment forward, a misstep could widen the gap beyond repair. A clever, calculated move could regain control and reshape perception. And somewhere in Montecito, amidst strategy sessions and crisis meetings, Meghan made a decision her team did not expect. A decision insiders say could make the to-have rethink his decision. What do you think about Meghan's sudden move to pacify King Charles? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe.